This video will focus on the primary sources of economic progress. It answers the question, what is necessary for economies to grow? What is necessary for standards of living to rise and for poverty to fall? This brings us to key element 8. Economic progress comes primarily through trade, investment, better ways of doing things, and sound economic institutions. How trade helps bring about economic progress was looked at in key element videos 4 and 5, so we will not rehash the significance of trade. Instead, we will first highlight the roles of investment and innovations and then the importance of economic organization. These three factors will help us understand why North America is so much more affluent today than long ago, why the U.S. is much wealthier than many other nations around the world, why Americans today, unlike those at its beginning, get to enjoy what is known as the weekend, why Americans work so many fewer hours but earn higher incomes, why child labor is a thing of the past, and why workplaces have become safer and more pleasant. It is often claimed, and way too many people think this without any ounce of critical thought, without any ounce of critical questioning, that government and labor unions have been the savior of the working class throughout our nation's history. It is not enough to say that this tale is false. It is grotesquely false. It praises the very institutions that have held back American prosperity and unequivocally reduced the material well-being of the American population. And it condemns the only forces that have consistently and of necessity raised the standard of living of all Americans. To show the error in this perspective, consider the thought experiment used by Thomas Woods in his book 33 Questions About American History You're Not Supposed to Ask. Suppose some catastrophe should occur today that decimates the productivity of American labor. All automobiles are destroyed, and with them the knowledge to create new ones. Our entire transportation system reverts to railroads and the horse and buggy. In addition, fax machines, standard and cellular telephones, email, and the internet all vanish, as do radio and television, and our communications infrastructure is reduced to the telegraph. Likewise, all other capital equipment invented and developed over the course of the past 150 years is wiped out. Many conveniences we take for granted no longer exist at all, and the remainder must be made either by hand or with what from our point of view are the clumsiest and most inefficient machines. Needless to say, this economy is capable of far less production than it was before the catastrophe. In the midst of this disaster, suppose a group of self-proclaimed advocates for the working class declare that even in these radically changed circumstances, people should continue to work no more than 40 hours a week, and that it should be unlawful to ask any worker to put in additional hours. What would be the result? Without a doubt, massive impoverishment, malnourishment, and possibly even worse. That same labor force, working the same number of hours, but without the benefit of trillions of dollars of advanced capital and modern machinery to help them, can produce only the tiniest fraction of the consumer goods it once made. People will have to abandon the purchase of entire categories of goods just to be sure they have enough money for basic necessities. In fact, under these conditions, most people will have to be satisfied with the barest necessities, if they can even acquire those. The goods they might have purchased and enjoyed in the past simply do not exist in the necessary quantities to satisfy everyone, if indeed they exist at all. The American labor force is no longer physically capable of producing them. Under these circumstances, common sense tells us that we would all have to work much longer and harder in order to produce enough goods to enable us to maintain even a minimally acceptable standard of living. In such a situation, the goods we need would all be unusually scarce, and a great many consumers chasing relatively few goods would inevitably mean high prices. Workers throughout the economy would have to toil long and hard to produce the amount of consumer goods people believed they needed. If we stubbornly insisted on maintaining a 40-hour work week, even in the face of such changed conditions and such dramatically reduced output per worker, we would not produce anything approaching the amount of consumer goods that most of us would need. By modern standards, we would suffer unthinkable deprivation. It is this simple fact of reality, rather than any sinister machination of greedy businessmen, that would account for our low standard of living in such a case. In effect, this is something like the situation that people faced in England during the early Industrial Revolution, and to a lesser but still considerable extent in the economy in which American workers lived in the latter 19th century. The period in which it is routinely alleged that they were unconscionably exploited by greedy businessmen. If the disaster described occurred today, it is precisely to the conditions of 18th and 19th century England and America that we would revert. People back then could afford far fewer and considerably lower quality consumer goods than we do today because the country's capital-starved workforce could not produce any more. It is not possible for government legislation or labor union demands and pressure to grow the economy. Instead, as the thought experiment made clear, society needs to be much more productive. It needs to find ways to increase productivity. And what has made Americans more productive today than 250 years ago? Well, technology, capital, and trade. There are three engines of economic growth. There are three main factors that cause an economy to prosper. One of those is division of labor. And division of labor is a result of trade. Now, since we already talked about trade in key elements 4 and 5, we'll forego that. Another engine of economic growth is capital, tools, machines, equipment, those things that make human labor much more productive. And to get that, we need investment. We need people to be able to save and invest in the time and energy and resources it takes to create tools and machines that make mankind more productive. And so, as Key Element 8 says, investments and better ways of doing things helps to spur economic progress. We're going to focus on that. Investment in the skills of workers, investment in human capital, and investment in productive assets, investment in tools and machines, enhances our ability to produce goods and services. Workers, human capital, can become more productive through furthering their education. Not only does furthering one's education or furthering one's ability to perform certain skills improve productivity, but so do machines. Workers and machines are linked. Take a logger, for example. A logger can produce much more when working with a chainsaw or the modern equipment they have today than with a hand-operated crosscut blade. A transport worker can haul much more with a truck or a train than they can with a mule and a wagon. A person working at stocking and storing things can do much more with a forklift than if they just use their bare hands. Furthermore, improvements in technology, the use of brain power to discover new products, and less costly methods of production spur economic progress. During the last 250 years, numerous improvements in technology have spurred economic progress and improved our well-being. For instance, you got the steam engine, the internal combustion engine, electricity, nuclear power. All of these things replaced human and animal power as the major sources of energy. Automobiles, trains, buses, airplanes replaced the horse and buggy, and walking as the chief methods of transportation. And you have technological improvements that continue to change our lifestyles. Consider the impact of microcomputers, word processors, microwave ovens, video cameras, cellular phones, and now smartphones, DVDs, live streaming now instead, bypass surgery, hip replacements, air conditioners. Shoot, the new technology that we keep experiencing throughout our lives vastly changes the way we work, play, and entertain ourselves. And much of those changes make our ability to work and produce much more efficient, producing many more goods. And it's this ability to produce a lot more wealth at such great numbers that has allowed prices to come down. That, along with competition, makes what used to be only affordable to the wealthy affordable to the common man. After all, mass production is production for the masses. And a free society, a free market capitalist society, creates the environment and the incentives for this to happen. It has allowed for the investment in capital, tools, and equipment that have vastly increased our productivity, which is responsible for working fewer hours, having higher real wages, and giving us the weekend. Now that we looked at how capital investment increases productivity and its impact on real wages and the number of hours worked, let's look at its effect on child labor, leisure time, and working conditions. Because capital investment increases productivity, resulting in higher real wages and fewer necessary work hours, parents no longer require the supplemental income provided by their children. When the income of parents is enough to support the family, children are taken out of the factories and mines. Legislation banning child labor only codified what the free market had already created. Furthermore, as the economy expands and more opportunities are created and competition for consumer dollars increases, prices drop further and wages rise higher. There eventually comes a point when a marginal increase in one's wage or salary is not as valuable as working fewer hours and enjoying a day or two off. And as the economy continues to flourish, thanks to the coordination and incentives established in a free market economy, real wages increase enough for families to begin taking whole weeks off of work and taking vacation. Without the capital investment, simply mandating higher wages and fewer hours cannot grow an economy and lift living standards. Instead, such laws, absent of capital investment, only serve to make life for the poor more difficult. To put into perspective the almost miraculous benefits that free market capitalism has created for the American working class, consider this. The average middle-class family today lives better than millionaires did in the early 1900s and better than kings and queens did in the early 1800s. A 19th century millionaire could not grab a cold drink from the refrigerator. He could not hop into a smooth-riding automobile for a 70-mile-an-hour trip down an interstate highway to the mountains or seashore. He couldn't access the internet and almost instantly call up news, movies, music, and sporting events by simply looking at his phone or asking Amazon Echo or Google Home to convey the desired information. He couldn't turn on his lights, TV, heat with his voice. He couldn't jet north to Toronto, south to Cancun, east to Boston, or west to San Francisco in just a few hours. He couldn't transmit documents to Europe, Asia, or any place else in seconds. He could not escape the summer heat and air-conditioned comfort. He could not check into a hospital for a coronary bypass to cure a failing heart, get a shot of penicillin to ward off infection, or even take an aspirin to relieve a headache. None of these things were available a century ago at any price. Then, at first, every one of them was available only to the rich. But over time, each became available virtually to everyone, all because of the coordination and incentives established in a free market economy. Working conditions. Working conditions that were unpleasant or even unsafe, dangerous, subsided to a great extent because of the free market system. A dangerous workplace is costly to employers because, if they have a reputation of having a dangerous workplace, then in a competitive labor market, they must pay a wage premium to entice workers to take the extra risk. More dangerous or unpleasant jobs, from working in an oil field to riding on the back of a garbage truck in the winter in New England, always require a wage premium if they are to be filled. Thus, capitalists do strive to make their own workplaces safer as a way of reducing their wage bill and consequently increasing their profits. An added incentive for safety is that a worker who is off the job because of an injury is not producing anything that the employer can sell, and it is costly to hire and train replacements. Now, of course, human beings will always make mistakes and cause accidents, and some employers are smarter than others in terms of going about the task of improving job safety. But overall, the profit incentive embedded in capitalism is the strongest driving force leading to a safer work environment. And of course, the way in which American capitalism has evolved also makes the workplace much safer. Mechanization made work easier and safer for farmers and everyone else, and now the information age has created millions of jobs that are inherently safer than machine-age jobs or back-breaking, unmechanized agricultural labor. And as competition for labor has become more and more intense, employers have tailored their compensation to meet the changing desires of their employees. Better working conditions, better pay, and a mix of pay and fringe benefits that is to the employee's liking are all the products of free market capitalism and not any kind of government program or labor union demands.